This is the recipe that helped me land my cookbook deal. It's a 3-cheese sourdough bread. It's incredibly delicious. And when I was in the process of starting to write a cookbook, I had to go through this process and send the editors a sampling of my recipes, and this was one of them that I sent. They made it and said, oh my goodness, this is incredible. Yes, you can write a cookbook for us. Now I have my cookbook, The Beginner's Guide to Sourdough, and it even includes a 3-cheese loaf. It's not the same loaf, it's a different recipe. It's a little bit of an easier version, so go check that out if you want kind of a less hands-on version. Still delicious, incredible. But today I'm gonna teach you how to make this 3-cheese sourdough loaf, and it's a good one. This is my 3-cheese sourdough bread. I printed out the recipe from my website, amybakesbread.com. Go ahead, go to my website, grab the recipe, or read through all of the instructions. I have them step-by-step laid out for you, but I'm gonna show you how to make it. It's cheesy, it's crispy, it's so good. Let's make it together. I start this recipe the same way that I do my classic sourdough bread, and that is with a ripe levain or an active sourdough starter. So the recipe itself calls for the levain, and all that is it's basically a power feed of your sourdough starter. So you take a little bit of your starter, you mix up a levain, and you're gonna use all of that levain in your bake. I think it's especially helpful for somebody who keeps their starter in the refrigerator, who's not maintaining their starter on the counter all of the time, to do that levain style method. I think it's gonna give you kind of a better bread in general. But if you have a ripe, active, bubbly sourdough starter, or you didn't plan ahead and your starter is ripe and active and you've maintained it a few times, at least during the week on the counter, you can substitute that bubbly active sourdough starter for the levain. Okay, don't let that part scare you away. That's that beginning part of the recipe. I always start mine with the levain because I want everyone on an equal playing field, and every starter to have that feeding, a good power feed before you mix your dough with it. So we're gonna start. I'm using a container today. I like these containers, especially when I'm adding inclusions into my bread. I think it makes it easier to add them, and we're gonna be doing probably some coil folds instead of stretch and folds today with that. So I'm gonna go ahead and add in my bubbly active starter right into the container. We're doing 100 grams of starter. If you go a little bit over or a little bit under, that's okay. If you were using a levain in this, you would have used up all of the starter or the levain that you made. I still have leftover sourdough starter in here, so I'm either gonna use it in another bake today, or I will discard some of it and refeed my starter, or I'm just gonna stick it in the fridge and maybe use it in a few hours, a little bit later, maybe even tomorrow. Next, we're gonna add in our water. And we're gonna start with 350 grams of water. The total water in this is gonna end up being 375 grams, so we're gonna reserve 25 grams of the water to add in a little bit later. This first step that we're doing is called a Autolyse, and all that means is that we're adding the flour, the water, and the starter together. We're mixing it. We're gonna let it sit for about 30 minutes or so, just to give those gluten strands a little bit of a head start, to get them active and strong, because once we add the salt constricts. Okay, it constricts those strands, and so it's gonna make it like a little bit less chewy, puffy. It doesn't rise, you know, it will rise if you leave it out, but it doesn't rise quite the same. So this just gives it a little bit of a head start. If you thought maybe you don't have enough time, or you want to skip this step, you can add all the water and all the salt and everything right now and just mix it all together and skip the Autolyse step. I do like doing it for like a classic sourdough, and if you have the time, I recommend doing it. We've got our starter, we've got our water in there. Time to add our flour. We're gonna do 450 grams of bread flour, and then we're gonna do 50 grams of whole wheat flour. I like using a bread flour and a whole wheat flour combination. I think it gives a little more depth of flavor to your dough. So that's one of the reasons that I like to use it. If you didn't want to use the whole wheat, you could just use all bread flour in this. And this is my whole wheat. I freshly mill it. And I did that earlier today. One thing to keep in mind is as you're adding the ingredients here to your container, the temperature of your ingredients matter. So temperature is really important for a sourdough loaf. I like to keep mine between 76 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. That just helps the dough to, ferment at a good place, and it's the optimal temperature that wild yeast and bacteria work together, and that's what I want for my sourdough loaves. So that's the temperature I try most of the time to keep my dough at. Now, does that mean it has to be that temperature? No, it doesn't. Okay, if you're a little bit lower than that, it just means it's gonna take longer for your dough to show all of these signs that we're gonna be looking for. If it's warmer than that, it's gonna go faster. Oh, another thing too, you may have noticed I am using a kitchen scale. I do love, I highly recommend if you're a sourdough beginner or a newbie or even just somebody that wants to be a better baker, use a kitchen scale. Cup measurements are just not as accurate, especially when you're working with this like higher hydration sourdough that you may not know how it's supposed to feel, because it's a lot harder to go by feel when it's higher hydration. That's my own opinion. Anyway, get yourself a kitchen scale if you don't have one. I know it can be like a mental hurdle sometimes, but it is very worth it. Okay, I have mixed up this dough mostly. I like to go around it now. I have this little tool. I got it on Amazon a while ago, and it's so nice to like get into the corners and scrape down the sides of my container, my bowl. Just making sure that this dough is all hydrated. It's got all that water in it. It's all, mostly come together. But you can see it's very sticky, okay? So I'm gonna let this sit. We're gonna cover it and let it sit for 30 minutes. I think I'm gonna stick it in my bread proofer over there. Actually, I'm gonna take the temperature to make sure I know what the temperature is. I always think it's like, just pop a thermometer in your dough. This is like 80 degrees, 81. So I don't need to stick it in my bread proofer right now. I'm gonna leave it on the counter for its first 30 minutes. We'll check the temperature a little bit later too. We'll come back after 30 minutes, add in our salt and our water. And while I'm talking about that, I'm gonna go ahead and measure out my salt right now. I like to do this just so that I don't forget to add it later. Okay, I'm doing 10 grams of salt. I'm just putting that into this bowl, and then I keep my bowl right on top of my container. So I'm gonna remember when I come back, okay, I've gotta add the salt, I've gotta add a little reserved water as well. While my dough is resting, I'm gonna go ahead and prep the cheese for my 3 cheese sourdough loaf. I like to use different kinds of cheese for this. So definitely ones that have great flavor. So I use a cheddar. This is a sharp cheddar. And then I've got a gruyere, which adds incredible depth of flavor, and a parmesan. So those 3 combined, I just love the flavors. Now you could change up the flavors to any cheese that you like, but try to do ones that are like maybe a little bit stronger cheeses, and maybe some of them that are hard too, because that will give that like just a little bit more flavor to your loaf. So I'm gonna add my cheese into this bowl, and I'll refrigerate this until we're ready to use it. The other thing I was gonna say about cheese is a lot of cheese you see at the store comes like pre-shredded or pre-grated. I don't like to use that in my breads because they can have these like anti-caking agents on there, so like added cornstarch or things like that. It doesn't give you like the nice melty cheesy loaf that you're looking for. So we're gonna add in 100 grams of that cheddar, and then 50 grams of this gruyere and 50 grams of parmesan. The only thing I will say is sometimes with the parmesan, I have been successful using the one from Costco, the shredded parmesan. Today I'm gonna use a brick, so you could try that. Our cheese is all ready to go. I'm gonna keep this in the fridge until we're ready to add it into our loaf. It's been 30 minutes. We're gonna add in our salt and a little bit of reserved 25 grams of water. You can see how this is looking. If I go in here, see how that gluten is already starting to develop? That's why we do that little fermentolise step. And then we're gonna add in our salt. Salt will shrink that gluten a little bit, but you need salt. So you've got to have that balance of both, but we give it a little bit of a head start doing that fermentolise. And then we're gonna add in 25 grams of water. And we just come in with our hands and we're going to kind of squeeze the dough, pinch it and squeeze it and just incorporate that salt and that extra water. This is the part I really like. You're just getting your hands all into that dough and it's kind of fun to work it around. I love to watch the dough develop. I kind of like to do this motion. Once the dough kind of has started to come together like this, you pick the dough up, fling it against your container or your bowl. See how that stretches the gluten strands? That's the goal, is that stretching method. So that's kind of encouraging that gentle gluten development. You can watch the dough start to change. I love that. Okay, once it is mostly together like this, we're gonna cover it back up. I'm gonna check the temperature again. Okay, we're now at about 74, so it's gone down in that half an hour. So I'm gonna stick it in my bread proofer at 78 just to keep it warm. If you didn't have a bread proofer, you could use your oven with the light turned on. You could use a warm appliance, anything that you can find to keep this warm. I have a whole article about this on my website with lots of ideas for how to keep your dough warm. We're gonna wait 30 minutes and come back to this to start our first set of stretch and folds. This is our first set of folds. Now, typically if I was doing this in a bowl, I would be doing stretch and folds where you reach down and stretch over. And because it's in this kind of a container, I like to do coil folds where you pull up, kind of form a coil and let it fall back down. I need to use a little bit of water on my hands because this is sticking to my fingers. You don't want to let it tear. Let it fall back down. There we go. We're going to cover this, and then on our next set, we'll add in our inclusions. Okay, we're on our second set of stretch and folds here, which actually we're doing some coil folds. We're gonna dump in our cheeses that we had already grated. Now this may seem like a lot of cheese to you, and that's because it is a lot of cheese, but it gives this like cheesy crust and it just tastes so delicious. Now this cheese is cold from my fridge, so it may bring the temperature down just a little bit of my dough. That's okay. We're gonna, keep it warm in my bread proofer or in another way to keep it warm, but that's just something to keep in the back of your mind so that could happen. We just are folding that cheese in. We're gonna still give this a few more folds. So we will add that cheese in, kind of fold it in as we go. That's our second set of folds. The cheese has been added. We'll be ready to go in another 30 minutes. All right, it's been another 30 minutes. We're gonna go ahead, see how this is spread out a little bit more. We're gonna go ahead and give it another set of folds here. Nice set of coil folds. We're just working in that cheese. You can see how this dough is really coming together nicely. All right. Put this on, we'll do one last set in about 30 minutes. It's been another 30 minutes. This is gonna be my last set of folds, coil folds here. Up again, see how it makes that coil? That's why it's called a coil fold. And this dough is just looking beautiful. We're gonna let it rest now for about 1.5 to 2 hours at 78 degrees. It has been another probably 1.5 to 2 hours. You can see how much this has risen. It's doming. It's probably risen about 50%. So it's ready to be shaped. We're pulling the dough out of the container. The dough is sticky. That's normal, but the gluten is well developed. And so because the gluten's well developed, we're still gonna be able to work this dough, okay? But if you leave your hand on it for a long time, it's gonna stick. So you wanna make sure that you're working kind of quickly. You can also wet your hand a little bit with some water if you need to, or use a bench scraper, just go under the dough. We're forming a nice ball. This is to pre-shape our dough, to get it ready so that we can shape it and get it into a banneton. All right, we're gonna let that sit. It's gonna flatten out a little bit, kind of like a pancake, and then we'll shape it in a minute. About 30 minutes, actually. My dough has spread out here, and I have a banneton right here. I'm going to put a hairnet in here. I like to use a hairnet when shaping because then I don't have to add any extra flour, and I don't always like adding extra flour. So I'm gonna shape this without flour. If you wanted to add flour, you would put a little bit of flour right here on the top of your dough. We're gonna flip the dough over, okay? So that floured side, if you had flour, would be under there. And then we're just gonna shape this up. And this is how I like to shape my dough. Come to the other side, come in, come over. And this is already a nice little oval shape. So we're sticking it right into the banneton. I just kind of pinch close the seam here. And then I'm gonna cover this dough with a shower cap and stick it in the fridge until I'm ready to bake it, which is going to be tomorrow. This dough, if I wanted to, I could leave it out at room temperature. You know, that's still 78 degrees for another hour or two, and then bake it. You can do that as well, but we're gonna cold proof it tonight. Into the fridge it goes. Okay, it is the next morning. I've got my oven preheated, and look at this dough. We're gonna plop it out onto my parchment paper. For inclusion loaves, I don't usually do a huge score, like a decorative score, but I do like to usually just, I think I'm just gonna do one straight down the middle for this guy. Decorative scores sometimes don't work as well on these types of loaves, but you could still try it out if you wanted to. If you wanted to do a decorative score, add a little bit of contrast with some flour or something. Okay, I've got it on a piece of parchment. I'm gonna transfer this to my Dutch oven that has been preheating at 500 degrees. I'm gonna reduce the temperature to 450 and bake this for 25 minutes with the lid on, then take the lid off and bake for another 20. I've had my Dutch oven preheating. Lid comes off, we're gonna put the dough right in there. There's the dough. Adding the lid on, and it goes. And we're gonna decrease the temperature to 450. It smells so good in this kitchen right now. Okay, it's been 25 minutes. I'm gonna take the lid off. Oh wow, that looks incredible. I'm gonna bake this for another 20 minutes. Wow. That is a gorgeous, gorgeous loaf of this cheddar bread. I'm gonna pull it out and let it cool. Okay, my loaf has cooled down. Oh. Do you hear that crunch? The cheese on the outside makes this extra crispy, extra crunchy. Let's cut into it. Oh, yes. Look at that. Gorgeous, gorgeous. The cheese all throughout. This is a beautiful loaf. Did you see this? absolutely incredible. All right, we gotta taste it. Oh yeah. This one is extra crispy on the outside from all that cheese. It's so soft in the middle, and those flavors of the cheese really come through. You gotta try this one. I'm Amy from amybakesbread.com. This is my 3 cheese sourdough loaf. You can grab the recipe on my website. I think you're gonna love it. Comment below if you've made it before, or if you've made one like this, and tell me what you think.